Since then, since I retired from the federal government, I needed something to do. Because you can't play golf and tennis the rest of your life. You can only stay out on a boat so long. So I got involved again in what I used to do when I lived in Florida, which is urban planning. And I started off very small because a charter school, and I don't really think it's a charter, but a private school, wanted to locate on a piece of land which was currently occupied by the church. It's 43, I think about 42 acres on Bee Ridge Road. They intended to have about 1,300 students, another 500 staff, and our judgment, my judgment as a planner and the rest of the community that we mobilized was that that was way too intense a land use for a parcel that size, serviced by a piece of Bee Ridge Road, which is only 2 lanes by the Publix on the eastern side of Bee Ridge. So we played along. We went to the neighborhood workshop, or we participated in the neighborhood workshop. We took a look at the application from the school. We didn't hire anybody because we didn't have any money, but those of us who had skills, planners, engineers, an architect, a traffic engineer, an environmentalist, we were all retired professionals. We used our own judgment. We examined the application. We gave our thoughts to the county professional staff, and then we participated in the public hearing process, starting with the planning commission, which didn't turn out well, and then to the county commission, which also didn't turn out well. But we went through the process, and for all of us, including myself, because I hadn't done this in 30 years, it was a learning process, understanding how Sarasota County operates, understanding the political alignments. It turns out this school is a school that educates the children of some of the political elite in Sarasota County. So that didn't make it any easier. And the county, the last county commission, and the current county commission have provided it a good deal of deference, shall we say. So we analyzed what we thought the impact was going to be of this school, located, it's about 1.5 miles from our house, but close to a number of other gated communities. We estimated the traffic, we looked at the environmental impact, the light, the noise, everything, and we came up with our own analysis to give it to the county, and they completely ignored it. Not completely. There were some aspects of the professional staff's report that did reflect some of the data and some of the analysis that we did. But the problem is, both in front of the county commission, and then eventually when we took it to the courts, while we had, I guess we'd call it standing, we had an interest in this, we had the right to be there, they heavily, heavily discounted any of our analysis and pretty much all of our conclusions. And so, this school received a special exception, which is essentially a rezoning of certain conditions, and moved from Fruitville Road, you guys always want to move from Fruitville Road to Bee Ridge Road. So the nightmare on Fruitville Road was mitigated for a little bit of time, but not long, and it just transferred over to Bee Ridge. And it's not been good. Pretty much everything that we as an organization predicted and testified to in the public hearings and gave in writing to the county has pretty much happened. There's enormous traffic problems. There's a huge public safety problem because there's one point of access and egress to a facility that's, again, way too intense. There's parking way up, right up to Bee Ridge Road, so it looks like an auto dealership twice a day when the children are brought in and when their parents come to pick them up. So there's parking on the lawn in front of the structures there. And then on Friday evenings, when there's football games, there's terrible, terrible noise produced for the people who live just south of it and just north of the community. So pretty much everything we predicted has come to pass. We talked to the county commissioners about it to no avail. We hired an attorney. We hired actually 2 attorneys, and we took it to the 12th Circuit Court, where we lost because the judge judge basically gave deference to the county commission as a legislative body. That was it. You know, the judge did not rule on whether we were right or wrong, or whether they were right or wrong. It's by default. They're the people who we elected to represent us. It's their job to sort this out. And although they, you know, we're allowed to say what we believe, there's not much more we can do about it. We appealed to the district court up in Tampa or St. Pete, and even worse, the district court didn't even give us an opinion. They just turned it down. I mean, we still had standing, but I guess on appeals in Florida, the appellate level doesn't have to give its reasons. I mean, that's just not fair. But we did get some concessions. I mean, there were some stipulations that were agreed to that the professional staff suggested, because we had in fact suggested them, and that the applicant agreed to in accepting the special exception, that did mitigate some of the worst impacts of this. But by and large, it's still having this outsized impact on our community. We have gotten involved, and I'll talk to this more when we talk about enforcement. We did monitor, and we still monitor the school's performance and how it impacts the surrounding neighborhood. And we have filed code enforcement complaints against the school for violating the county code. And we have gotten somewhere with that. The county fined the school several times, ordered them to take mitigation measures, but again, it was very small and very little. And on the big, single most important issue, which deals with these modular classrooms that they're using to house many of their students, the court, the 12th Circuit, did find that they were there illegally and improperly. And they have been fined for that, but the county, for whatever reason, has closed the case and walked away from it. So, you know, that's a little shocking, because for those of us who believe in the rule of law, when something like that happens, where there's a very clear violation of the statutes, and for whatever reason the county decides it doesn't want to pursue it, that's an issue. Now, the county argues that the state has preempted the county when it comes to private schools operating on former church or former public properties. So the state, as you know, has a policy of encouraging school choice and helping these private schools, whether they're charters or not, helping them through tuition vouchers, as well as now helping them sort of navigate the morass of land use controls, building codes, and so on and so forth, and basically have passed laws that have been amended once already, which basically preempts any local authority. And so we're trying to figure out what we do about that, because that's part of a trend here in Florida. It seems like the state, more often than not, is preempting local authority, local control on many issues, which is, as far as I'm concerned, moving the state of Florida, moving the whole country back. I mean, there's some great things this country has accomplished, as have other countries around the world, but it wasn't because the central government got things right. It's because a lot of responsibility is delegated down to local authorities, and us voters have a more direct say in what happens to us locally. But Florida is moving in the opposite direction, and that's something I think that we're going to be looking into in the future. So our organization has gone from one that focused on one land use conflict, which is the school, to start to get involved in a whole variety of other overdevelopment and other land use conflicts that are afflicting the county and the state. And with the support of our members, there's about 800 people who read our monthly blog, and of that, about a quarter of them, sometimes a half, actually contribute financially to help defray our costs. So we have a pretty good group of people who are interested in this, who are very passionate about preserving the quality of life, at least in our neighborhood. And I would say a fair number of them also understand that what we're going through is not unique. It's happening countywide, it's happening statewide, it's actually happening across the whole country. And so they've stayed involved with us, they continue to contribute, and they continue to encourage us to look at issues beyond just our own neighborhood. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you to my colleagues at the table. You are showing me just how youthful our organization is compared to where you all stand today. Actually, to borrow one of your words, Sarah, I think one of the secrets to the success of the PCC was being annoying. And we started out being annoying. I will say that our relationship with the county has evolved, and I think we all do, that we've got a pretty good relationship with them, and we certainly meet with them, often enough. But that's not the way it started. The Phillippi Creek Coalition is an amalgam of these 4 neighborhoods that Susan just introduced to you. And some of my colleagues are here tonight to make sure that when it comes to questions and answers, we get them all answered accurately. I will say that I've been in different organizations. I think at this stage of life, a lot of us have. This one, for me, is probably one of the more unusual. And one of the reasons that we are more unusual is it just that we've got 4 individual organized groups coming together as equals. But there is no formal structure. We don't have a president or a vice president. We sure don't need a treasurer because we're broke. No money at all. So, that basically we see it as the numbers of people we represent is our currency. That's what gets us into the doors. When we can say we've got 2,000 or 3,000 people that are listening to what information we share from the county, that gets people's attention. But one of the things Susan had asked us to speak about a little bit was the organizational structure, kind of what our joint objective is, that kind of thing. So I'm going to try and give you an overview of that. SAM, which is represented here by Dave Oach. SAM is an organization that was formed, actually, I think we agreed it was about 3 years ago in response to Hurricane Ian, if not somewhere between them. It is focused on the south end, the mouth of the creek at US 41, and then goes forward a little bit. So they had been trying to get the county's attention to dredge for 3 years and had not had much success. And then, of course, with the flooding and the storms of 2024, they found themselves back at the table. Forest Lakes and Southgate. Southgate has 2,200 homes. They're along Phillippi Creek. They have some oxbow areas there, so they too had been trying to plead their case to the county in previous years. Forest Lakes and Pinecraft, who Laura and I represent, because the Forest Lakes Homeowners Board said, we've got people that have flooded, we've got streets that have flooded, we had sewage boxes that weren't working, that's never a good thing. And, we had lost our water for a while, so our board said, one of the things we need to do is take this on. And so we did. I will say that the objective of the group is pretty clear. There were 3 storms in one season, and somebody had to step up. And these people are some of the folks that did. So the goal was pretty simple. It was to get the creek dredged. That was it. The battle cry actually became dredge, baby, dredge. That was in the newspaper at one point. And of course it turned out that it was easier said than done. If there had been as much action as there were excuses, it might have been dredged by now. But we became acutely aware, frankly, that the 2024 storms were not the only catastrophe. There had been a catastrophic failure to maintain the creek, specifically Phillippi Creek. That was it. And the organizational vehicle for change, I call it SS Stormwater, was a rudderless ship, and it was sinking fast. And I didn't know you were going to be here, Steve, but I'm going to give you some kudos because right about that time, that was when we were all going after this, trying to be heard at the county, going to the podium, sending emails, writing letters, whatever we were doing. We not meeting with any welcome signs. There was significant resistance and redirects. So at about that time, Steve Swa came to the BCC. You'll correct me if I get any of this wrong, Steve, but you had been hired by the county to do an audit of the stormwater department. You made a great presentation to the county, and everything you said made perfect sense. I mean, after all, it was coming from someone who was an engineer and a hydrologist and a former water management director. So we took note, we listened, we read the report, and keep in mind, we were all doing this independently at this point. We were starting to gather at the board meetings, casually, collecting emails, contact information, that kind of thing. But there was really no process to deal with this issue. All we knew to do was to go to the podium, write letters, kind of a one-sided effort. But when Mr. Swan went to the podium and gave that information, which you provided a process for change, which really gave us a roadmap. So a lot of things were happening, during the last 10 months. And that's kind of the time frame that I'm working with. I think Jim McWhorter, who is not part of this core group, but certainly played a major role. He founded the SAND organization, and I thought he actually started participating a little before us in early January, maybe December. We didn't get involved till January, and then things started to take on some energy, probably about the spring. So after Forest Lakes got involved, we brought our friends Pinecraft from Pinecraft into the mix, because while they were being referenced, they weren't being represented. So they joined us. So in Southgate, we reached out to our neighbors at Southgate, who, as I mentioned a moment ago, they had been dealing with issues years before. And so once again, they found themselves having neighbors and streets and people's homes, who had flooded. So once they kind of joined in the group and things went, communications, as I like to say, went nuclear, because they had 2,200 homes that they represented, as opposed to our 4,600 with neighbors along Beneva. And I'm not sure how many homes SAND represents, but either way, Southgate was the Goliath of the group. So for us, as we're kind of all independently dealing with the same issue and talking to some of the same people, what really started to give a lift and add some momentum to the effort was that the media started speaking about issues that they were doing research on as far as the county's stormwater division was being run. And so inadvertently, what happened is between the consultant Steve's report at the podium and our echoing of that report, and then the momentum from the media, the same messages started to be heard at the BCC level. That was a turning point, or at least one of the turning points, was when we collected at the second stormwater workshop. I don't know if anybody in this room attended any of those workshops or aware of what went on, but in March, the commissioners changed the structure. And to kind of reference Miles' conversation about how things are supposed to work, that was one of the first, I feel, dialogues about flooding that actually worked the way it was supposed to. Because the commissioners, who represented us were asking questions. This wasn't, a 3-hour soliloquy about, why it didn't work. So it was right about that time that the stormwater meeting came about. The residents that were showing up were starting to collect. The county then started hosting Zoom meetings on a weekly basis, and Sand was invited, and Southgate was invited. We had to ask to be invited, but we got in. And right about that time, when we started getting more information and more insight, frankly, what we learned is that there was a lot of misinformation that was being passed along. And it was obvious. And you talked to 5 different people, all good people. This isn't about that. This is about the structure and the conveyance, not of just water in the creek, but of information and a structure. It wasn't working. And we were the ones that had the most invested because of the obvious. So suddenly, after we had been each advocating to dredge, baby dredge, suddenly we realized if that was going to happen, if anything was going to happen, we were going to have to see some organizational changes. It was about that time we found ourselves suddenly advocating for a new stormwater director, someone that had the credentials to dig us out of this mess, because clearly the people that were overseeing it were there when we got into this mess. They were going to need some help to dig us out. So it was about that time that this group, as we started to coalesce, and I like to say we were not, obviously we were a group that evolved. We didn't have a date of formation. That we became a coalition. It gave us one name instead of everybody having to say this group, this group, this group, and this group. And ultimately, we formed the Phillippi Creek Coalition. What really took us to another level, and the ultimate objective here was to be heard. That was the ultimate objective. It wasn't to be adversarial. It was, we were in disagreement. And I like to say I've been married to a man for 47 years. And we don't agree on everything. And so if you think that you're going to agree with the decision makers on every single item, then you're going to be disappointed. So what we were trying to do was find a way to be heard and resolve the problem. So what really happened after that was, as we continued to move forward, we were conversing with some great people at the county. We were becoming more coalesced as a group. And I think when things really, another step when things really started to change was when the members of our group started doing their own research to try and get information when we were being told there was no information. So as it turned out for us, and this is just pure luck, we had some brilliant members come to the table. Laura Oakley has had 13 plus years of regulatory and agency experience. That's a big deal. And Nadia has produced documentaries, and therefore she knows where to go to dig for the historic information permits that were needed. She actually discovered a permit in 1926 through help with the Federal Archives that indicated there was a permit showing, I think, maintenance dredging 100 years ago. I mean, and this was something we were told didn't exist. And Nadia goes, not so fast. So she did that. And then Seth Johnson, who is not here, He is brilliant with IT. He went, discovered through all these documents that Laura and Nadia and Seth and Christy, another member who's not here tonight, and Dave and Jake were uncovering. And then he literally created an overlay, a map with an overlay of 1926 Creek, how it looked, and the current overlay. Now the real key to where I think the success of these people comes from is with that information, the county started to contact us. They started to see some of us, I am excluded from that. They started to see some of us as experts that would help them. And that was our plan. That's all we really wanted to do. Instead of telling us, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, that doesn't exist, we would come back and go, but how? How can we do it? And we just happen to have this expertise on board. So the bottom line is, as I close here, I'm not sure where I am on the 15 minutes. Hopefully I haven't, reached it yet. That in the case of this group, which I said is very different, it's not, the PCC works not because of the process, but because of the people. Dave's military background, he jumped in, he started documenting every meeting we had. And Susan will tell you, as a few others, we were showing up at every committee meeting there was in Rock too. I think so. A few of us at the SUAC meetings, the WCIND meetings, just about any meeting that was held that had the word stormwater in charges today, and we were there. So Dave has managed to track and document to the degree that we have records of what we found, what we said. And I have to speak to Christy and Jake, who belong to the SAND organization, because everyone's contribution is essential. And there's only 7, but like I said, there's 7 leaders. And before I talk about Christy, to use Laura's metaphor, the group is like an amoeba. It changes shape. Different leaders step up and step back as, different events call for it. There's really no one that has to, lead all the time. Like Susan said, I drew the short straw, so I'm here tonight. But, the fact is, everyone steps up and steps back, all in the favor of the ultimate goal, which is to get the damn creek dredged. That's the goal. So Christy is one of those people. She knows how to ask questions, and she doesn't walk away until she's gotten her answers, much to the dismay of several people she meets with. Jake, you need to know Jake, because Jake is the face of this. Jake, more than a year later, still isn't living in his home. He evacuated at 3 a.m. in the morning with 3 feet of water and his toddler daughter on his shoulders. That's the kind of stuff that keeps you going. Because this isn't just about a lack of government oversight. This is about people's livelihoods. When we make excuses for not getting paperwork done, or not getting things dredged, or not having enough money, boy, that was wrong. You're talking about people's lives. And I think that's one of the reasons we don't just have 7 members, we have 7 champions. And so we plan on evolving. In fact, Chrissy's not here, but she asked me if I would make sure to share that our goal has evolved from just this baby dredge. Now we've revised that a little bit, and it'll probably be revised as we evolve. But our goal is to end flooding through dredging and maintenance along the entire creek. to the maximum extent possible. That's what we hope to do. That's who we are. And we'll probably be reaching out to somebody in this room for help. So thank you for your time.
The persistence that all three of the groups that you represent, that's what kept hitting me through everything you all said, was to be persistent and don't let somebody tell you no. Don't take the no for the final answer. So that's a really good lesson to know, because what your group did, what the Phillippi Creek Coalition did, I have not ever seen happen at a local government level. To effectuate a policy change like that within the organization and have the county commissioners who have sort of been trained to be somewhat passive actually force this change on the county administrator. So I was in awe of that. So that was an amazing thing to happen, and well deserved. So a couple of questions for the panel. You've all come into the county's process at different times and in different ways. I'd like to hear a little bit more detail on how you organize your communications with the county. So like, for instance, did you call up planning staff and just set a meeting and go in and sit down with them? How did you get DR Horton to sit down with you? How did that communication change over time? And then the last part of the question, this one's a lengthy question, but I think it's worth it, is if you started the process over again, what would you do different? So who wants to, microphone's in front of you, Sarah, so you're on.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't meet with DR Horton at the very beginning. Yeah, you did. So Rob, how did that be? Because I know Jean knew people within Kimberly Horn. Is that how she got access to meet with people?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, I think basically Tom was very instrumental, and myself, and Gene and the rest of the crowd that came in with us. And the whole gist of it was that we wanted to try and find out if they're, number one, what their game plan was. And we thought by being, cooperative with them, we could get the information we needed. Because we knew if we were going to fight this, we needed to have all that information available. So consequently, we met with them, and we went over their plan, and we said, this is a good idea, this is a good idea, this is something that needs to change, this needs to change. And so we found them very cooperative initially, and we actually came up with a plan which, if it were being built somewhere other than the celery fields, would really be a place that people would want to live. That's how things started initially. And we continued pushing. We asked if we could contact Mr. Horton himself and ask if he would be willing to make a donation of the land. And that's when we found out that he had passed away, and that someone lower down in the organization was running everything. So consequently, it all started out as a thing where, but every time that we met with them, we would give them all these different suggestions of how things could be made better. But we also made a point of saying, however, we are not saying we are in agreement with this project. We want to have this to remain as it is, because of the celery fields and all the things that go with it. And so we're not giving you our blessing. We're strictly saying that if you end up winning this scenario, we will help you make it the most environmentally friendly that anybody's ever seen from that perspective. And then time just went on and on and on. And we eventually ended up, again, telling them that, okay, you're going for this, well, we're going for it too. So we will see you at the planning commission and wherever it goes from there.
Yeah, and we were very clear every step of the way, because we would see all of the DR people at every meeting and say, we just don't believe that this property should be developed beyond its current zone, every time. So they were never, unclear on our position.
They were never misled.
No, and as far as communication with the board, one thing we found really helpful is a one-click email. While the content is the same across the board, it does show the volume, and it makes it very easy for people in the community to engage and participate. Because a lot of people are overwhelmed by the idea of writing a letter, but if you can just click a button and it sends an email, you can show you actually care about it. And I was CC'd on every single one that went. So over the course of this, it was thousands of emails, and it was a lot. But I do think it's helpful for them to understand, like you said, the quantity of voters, because that's what we are, constituents that care about this, so they understand the impact. What was the other thing that you asked?
If you had it to do over again, is there something you would do differently?
I don't know, because every step of the way it sort of changed. I was pretty proud of the way we handled it. I think we stayed really on course and above the board. We did really good fundraising. Our Celebrity Fields page, which is run by Audubon members, has 25,000 followers. So again, we have big vehicles to raise money. So we just put a fundraising page out, we raised $16,000. It's
Wow.
just very easy. Like, I'm not saying other organizations have it that easy. It's not that we have it a lot easier. We've built this for 73 years, so we have access that a lot of people don't. But that doesn't mean you can't create a fundraiser. I'm sure the people, you have a lot of constituents in your communities that probably could, and making it easy, another one-click donation type scenario. Anything you can make as easy as possible, people will do. That's really a big key, because I think people care, like people definitely care about the Deer Village, they care about Classical Academy and where it went. I know you were careful not to say their name, but I'm sorry about that. But people care, they just can only care to like their bandwidth, right? So like making it as easy as possible for them to participate really helps your cause.
And Miles, I know y'all came in sort of too late to really have a lot of involvement with staff, but I know you've dealt with staff a lot, and even later on, you've engaged in direct discussions with the school who shall not be named, manager, or whatever you call the head guy. So give us a little bit about that end of things.
Yeah, we had a good start because there was a predecessor organization to SEERD, which was called the Bee Ridge Neighborhood Committee, BRNC. And it was still is chaired by a woman named Marguerite Malone. And Marguerite is a fixture within the county GOP. She knows everybody, she cares deeply, she's a pretty good organizer. But she wasn't up to the task of launching a major challenge to that school. She had done a great job with the public shopping center in the neighborhood to make sure that it was downsized and that it was, and that it fit into the neighborhood. She was involved with the 4-laning and the boulevarding of Bee Ridge Road when all that work was done. So the Bee Ridge Neighborhood Committee had done some really good things in the past, but they were not up to the challenge of raising money, hiring lawyers and engineers and planners, which was necessary to be able to challenge the special exception for the school. So SEERD was created, spun off of the Bee Ridge Neighborhood Committee, but Marguerite was still helpful. She introduced us to developers in town. That's how I met Pat Neal. That's how I met the people who were building Turners. Yeah, Turner. Then she introduced us to some of the planners downtown, right? And so she knew how the process worked. She just wasn't up to the task of marshaling the technical expertise, creating an organization that could actually raise money, hiring people. She just didn't have that. It just wasn't in her at that point. So a bunch of us young people did that. We did that. And for me and some of my colleagues who are retired planners and engineers, talking to professional staff downtown was easy. I mean, we spoke the same language. In fact, we intimidated them a little bit. Because we had their credentials and 40 years of experience, and so we didn't mean to tell them how to do their job, but we did. And we offered our own analysis, we shared data, they provided information to us, we provided information to them, and actually, they did the right thing. For a special exception, there's 12 criteria that the county requires to show that there is consistency between an application and these criteria to get a special exception. And in 8 of those 12 criteria, the county professional staff found reasons to question whether those criteria were consistent given the application. So they did their job. They raised the questions. It was our county commission that chose to ignore their professional staff. And there was an interesting conversation between whoever was the chair of the planning commission at the time, and also the county commission and the county attorney. And that is, do we have to do exactly what our professional staff says? If our professional staff has found that 8 of the 12 criteria are not consistent, you should be turning down the special exception. You're not entitled in this life to a special exception. It's called special for a reason. And special means you're consistent with all 12 that aren't criteria. We pointed out, as did the professional staff at the county, that there were 8 of the 12 criteria that there were serious questions about. But what did they do? They approved it. Right? So something's not right. I think the county attorney was correct. I shouldn't say this too loud, because I often think the county attorney's office is not correct, but I think they were correct in telling the commissioners, you're the decision makers. The staff don't make the decisions. The staff do the technical work. They do the analysis as we did. The commission makes the decision. At the end of the day, it's a political decision, whether we like it or not, okay? But that's how we got to start working with the county staff and with the commissioners and the attorney's office. Also, back in the day, and this is just up until last year, there was a database at the county that was forward-facing to us residents. You could see a rezone or a special exception going through each of the county staff offices. You could see how it was being and when it was being and who was doing the review.
It's when they first started using the new program, Sara.
Yeah. So you could see the process, and you could actually see the comments that the county staff were making. So it was extremely transparent. And we sat back in Mystic Creek and back in Bee Ridge, and we watched our county staff counterparts going through the application, just like we had done, making their analysis, writing up their reports. And when it was finally delivered to the county, to the planning commission, and to the county commission, we knew that 8 of the 12 criteria were not completely consistent, right? But the county commission still voted to approve it.
And since then, access to that part of the system has been removed.
Yeah, because it was
Can't
a
see
little too
that.
transparent for our local government, I'm sorry to say. But that's what it was. But it was remarkable for me to, and all of us to be able to see the whole process right before our eyes. And it was easy to find. You can't do that anymore. And so that's the step backward for transparency. What are they hiding? If at the end of the day, the rules allow the county commission to decide on its own, irrespective of what their professional staff does, why can't we see what the professional staff is up to? Why can't we interact with the professional staff? A lot of us actually know something about the subject. And the county staff were gracious enough to talk to us and to at least listen to what we had to say. And a lot of it was reflected in their final report.
Well, it's good to hear that they included a lot of that.
They did.
Briefly touch on your discussions directly with the school much later in time, but you still, at the behest of your attorneys, still tried to work with the school.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all attorneys counsel their clients that there's some benefit to negotiating, right? You can't litigate everything, even though it's fun sometimes. And it's fun to see what a judge does, and it's extremely satisfying to get a directive from a court in your favor. I mean, that's doesn't get any better than that. But at the end of the day, You know, the school knew what we knew, and we knew the impact that school was having. And the school wasn't completely unaware. I mean, even to this day, they worry about the traffic that they've created. They worry about the parking nightmare in front of the school. And they do worry about the noise, because whenever they have a Friday football game, the sheriff's department gets hundreds of calls. Right? I mean, people are furious when the noise gets to a certain level. There was one Friday, maybe it was the first Friday in September when they had a home game, that people on the south end of Misty Creek, which is 2 miles away, could hear it. That's how loud it was. And it was a combination of amplification and music and bullhorns and all kinds of stuff, and it just carries in the night air, the sound. And so the sheriff's office was beside itself, you know, with complaints. And they don't think that any more than we do. So the school's aware that we've had one sort of mediation session that was managed by our respective attorneys, and we're hopeful that we can have more discussions, because there's some very, very simple things they could do, which we know and which they know, to mitigate this and to lower the temperature on all this. In fact, their engineers were a lot smarter than they looked. Their engineers, as part of their application, designed a certain differential road that went around the entire 43 acres of their property. And the reason for that road was to get all the traffic off the Ridge Road as quickly as possible, allow kids to be dropped, cars to park, and then eventually to leave. They never built the certain differential road. And so the whole premise of their being able to manage traffic and avoid public safety disaster and everything else, and the optics of all those cars parked, all of that would have been solved if what they originally proposed and what the county originally approved was implemented. That's the solution. That would end all of this. And so our engagement with them now is just do what you said you were going to do and what the county agreed. And we're hoping that the county will take that position as well. Because the solution is in front of everyone to see, for whatever reason, they haven't done it.
And I'm gonna ask you to ask one of my colleagues here to respond.
Okay, I know that y'all began in your individual ways, appearing at county commission workshops. And I know there were things in previous years, but let's start from that time. And then it sounds like pretty quickly, some of you or all of you progressed to meetings with staff. Did you also go and meet individually with commissioners?
Yeah.
When did the meetings with staff, because I think they became like regular weekly meetings, if you can just walk through that chronology, and again, if there's anything that you would do differently.
Okay, you start.
So I'm Dave Oaks, and SAND stands for Supporters of Action Now for Dredging. And that was our founder, Jim McWhirter, his MBA daughter, MBA, she came up with that acronym in the early January. But anyway, I want to talk just very quickly about the Sarasota County Board of County Commissioner meetings, where we really got some really good momentum. But the key is that we went to probably 90% of those meetings. At least 2 of us were there at 90% of these meetings, so they got to know us. And we consistently showed up, and then we consistently spoke up. And we spoke at 90% of these meetings. You know, and I would say, you know, to the Board of County Commissioners, we are your informal staff. Because like Miles, you said, we had to mentor, because we have some skills that we were mentoring that stormwater division, because their culture was just awful. They had no leaders. I'm just saying, they had no leaders, in my view. So we told them we were their informal staff, and if they took some straightforward, honest information, they could make really good decisions. And I think they've been making some great decisions because they have been getting honest information, largely from us. I will tell you that, you know, you get 3 minutes to speak at these meetings. Well, it got to a point where we had some really momentum going in like the July timeframe. We showed up, Nana, you weren't there at that one meeting, but there's 4 or 5 of us spoke. And when Laura spoke, Joe Nunn would say, you have 3 minutes or more. Because he knew she was going to provide valuable information, just like Christie. You know, Christie would go in there and he'd go, you have 3 minutes or more. Okay, so that really told me a lot, because we had a lot of information to tell them. And then it got to a point where people would say, and they never told me this, but I've heard that, you know, they just said these Phillippi Creek people are so professional, so respectful, and that's really gave us a lot of credibility, a lot of credence and such. And the emails and the phone calls, they're answering those phone calls and emails all the time now, because they knew we weren't crying to them, we were offering them solutions. So now if you want to pick up from that.
I could maybe talk a little bit about kind of our meetings with the county and all that. When I first started on this, you know, as Connie mentioned, we were basically just at the podium, and, you know, we kind of coalesced, and how we really coalesced was Sam got invited to those county meetings, because we showed up at every single meeting, and finally county staff was like, we need to meet with you weekly, because we want you to know what's going on with Phillippi Creek, so you can tell everybody. And it was at those meetings that, you know, now we're every other week. We got a lot of really false information and misleading information. And, you know, it really colored our comments at the podium. And it all culminated with one press conference from a former employee who basically said, you have to get flood insurance. And that really angered all of us. And that was the beginning of the end for us. For changing the culture, trying to change the culture at Stormwater. I have to say, the people we work with are incredible at Stormwater. They are working their butts off. You know, they come out a bunch of times, talk to us, they've come to events, and they meet with us every week. And, you know, they may not have all the experience in the world, but they are trying their hardest, and you can tell. And so, you know, as much as we wanted to blame the county for everything, there are people at the county that really care. They just were kind of missing a rudder. And yeah, so our communication, you know, we communicate with them pretty regularly with commissioners. At Southgate, we started meeting with commissioners individually. And then as soon as we started forming our group, and I believe you guys met with commissioners too, and you guys met with commissioners. And then finally, when we coalesce now, we meet with them only when we really have a specific issue that we want to talk to. Or somebody makes a comment at the podium, and one of the commissioners will call that person and say, what were you saying? What did that, you know, what did you mean by that? So that's kind of been our communication. And some of our members do talk with the county administrator pretty frequently. And yeah, so we have a lot of communication with the county, and it's been great since the changes, I believe. You know, I don't know, I don't want to speak for all of you, but yeah.
That's great, very good information. We live in a time where there can be emotional and negative reactions to citizen efforts to effectuate change. Across the state of Florida, I've become aware of their increasing SLAP suits, strategic lawsuit against public participation, filed by developers or others against citizens that are trying to oppose development in particular, and also just the atmosphere of retribution and reaction to things. Miles has particular experience with this, but I'd like him to talk about that, and then Sara or Connie, if you were concerned about those things, or if you were just so charged up that that you went ahead with it anyway.
So, before I retired in 2019, I worked for the federal government. I was a diplomat overseas. And my last assignment, we used to move countries every couple of years. My last assignment was in Beijing, China. And among the things I did there was watch what Chinese do in terms of citizen participation, because they learn from us, and monitor what was happening with North Korea, where if you participate as a citizen, you're going to get your head chopped off. And, you know, we take it for granted in this country, but this country is extraordinary in many ways. Don't let anyone tell you different. We have this long tradition of citizen involvement in government. We have more or less a history of free and fair elections. The modalities we use for citizen participation are often criticized, like that damn 3-minute rule in front of the county commission with the clock ticking and the bell, and then you pull a lever and you fall into a trap door and people are talking. So it seems like it's very perfunctory. And then I came to learn when I came back here after 30 years overseas that the courts, at least in this state, have this funny thing called competent evidence. What do you call it, Susan?
Competent substantial evidence.
Competent substantial evidence.
And there's gotta be the right modicum of competent substantial evidence.
So the deal is, when us citizens talk in front of the county commission, they listen to us, and they might even look at us, and they might even be polite, and they may even take notes. But at the end of the day, they don't have to. And even worse, the courts don't want to hear from us at all, because from their point of view, with the exception of us being able to speak knowledgeably about whether a rezone or a special exception is compatible with our neighborhood, that's all they want to hear. They don't think we are capable of offering competent, substantial evidence, and certainly not compared to the engineers, planners, and architects who are paid to do that for a living. So it's a very, very uneven playing field. And again, remember that a lot of us used to do that stuff when we used to work. So we were architects and planners and engineers and whatever, lawyers, and we retired, but we haven't lost our brain cells, or at least not many of us, right? And we're still capable of contributing. And in a country like this, where the population is aging, and we have this huge baby boom population that's probably the most educated demographic in the history of man, to ignore that wisdom and that intelligence and those analytic capabilities is just silly, right? But that's the way the system works. So the playing field is not level, and that's something I think we need to think about and change, because it doesn't serve us very well. I mean, to ignore all that competence and intelligence and experience is a problem. If you speak out too loud, or if the other side starts to feel like they're losing, they're going to turn around and hit you with definitions. And it's an uncomfortable feeling. I mean, initially, at first, you take it personally because you think you did something wrong, but you didn't. But what it forces you to do is to defend yourself.
Well, so tell them about there was a lawsuit filed against you and another member.
Right. So just before Christmas last year, like a week before Christmas, a sheriff served us with a defamation suit. Not a nice time for you to do that. And it alleged a whole bunch of things. There's 7 charges. It's a public document. You can see it online in the 12th Circuit Court. And there's not one iota of truth in it, but it's a whole bunch of allegations, ranging from us besmirching the reputation of the school, all sorts of falsehoods. And then there's a really funny one, which got them in a lot of trouble, that we were using drones to spy on. That one's costing them some money, because there's a statute in the state of Florida, believe it or not, that if you erroneously charge someone with the misuse of drones, the prevailing party gets to get their legal costs reimbursed. So as my attorney said, there is a God. It's the God of drones. And probably, I have no idea what the legislative intent was when they put in that stipulation, but it was probably to protect the drone industry and the people who use drones for legitimate purposes. So you can't get, sued for. But anyway, the school alleged that we were using drones to spy on their program. So that costing us some money, and that's being litigated right now. But we had to hire 2 attorneys, actually 3 attorneys, and we had to spend a good deal of our money, a lot of our time, and a lot of our energy defending ourselves. The complainant, in this case the school, rather than respond to our defense, withdrew their entire petition. Right. So it was clearly intended to put us on the defense, because they had been on the defense all along, so that was our turn to be on the defense. It was intended to drain our coffers of money, which was annoying, but got to be some really interesting attorneys. And we learned a lot about the process. But it turns out that these slap suits are becoming more common. There's another one up in Miami City, which I'm aware of, and I've talked to Susan about, but they're happening all over the country, and it's intended to silence us as citizens. And you know, I've seen what it's like, and I've lived in places where citizen involvement is either discouraged or punished. And I don't think that's a way for us to become in the future. So believe me, don't take for granted our ability to have First Amendment rights and to be able to participate in our government. And any attempt to silence that should be taken very, very seriously.
Thanks, and that, it's nice, it's disappointing to have to hear about, you know, an actual occurrence of that, but it's something we all need to keep in mind. Also, keep in mind when you're testifying in front of the board, that you are under oath, that signature, that speaker's card you sign says you're under oath, and that's required in our charter. Unfortunately, the attorneys who represent the developers get to skate. They actually are authorized to lie, but that's another issue. But so just when you're speaking to the board, make sure you're speaking facts, and particularly lay testimony from neighbors is allowed and is weighed as competent substantial evidence. You can't say, I believe 100 cars on this road being added will cause it to fail in its level of service. You can't say that unless you're a transportation engineer. So you have to speak about your own experience and your own knowledge, and that's really important. But then lay people can qualify as experts, like the Audubon. Gene Doobie has extensive experience with birding and writing about it, leading, guiding trips.
And
So-
specifically the celery fields, there's no
Yes,
one that
specific-
knows celery fields
Right.
as much as she.
And so, but what's difficult is making sure that you qualify yourself as an expert in whatever you're testifying about. And you need to make sure that you submit your credentials, because the judge doesn't know you from the man in the moon. The board may know you and may listen and think about it, but the court's not gonna know unless it's in the record. So that's just one thing, one way to think about that. If you speak the truth, you're probably gonna be okay. Again, there used to be people regularly appearing before the county that would really cast aspersions on the county commissioners and some of the developers. And that's become, not only is it an unsettling and an unproductive thing to do, it can also now get you and cost you money if somebody decides to sue you. So Connie, one other issue I want to talk about before I turn it over to the audience. Recently, I've become aware of a number of homeowners organizations that have attorneys advising them not to get involved in working against a proposed development that may impact their community. I don't understand why they're doing that, as long as they're, short of committing money to it, it's well within their power. So you've had several HOAs involved in your effort. Have you run into any of those problems? And then we're going to ask Miles the same question.
Actually, the only HOAs that are part of the coalition are Southgate, who has an HOA, and Forest Lakes, who has an HOA. And we happen to have, with Forest Lakes, happen to have two attorneys. One that's an HOA attorney, and the other that's a zoning and land use attorney. So, well, there's a few distinctions. I know whenever we hear them talking, the media, whoever, about HOAs, they seem to think there's only one category of HOAs. There's not. We are not state statute according to 720. We're not a mandatory HOA, we're not, referenced in the same package as condominium HOAs, for example, we're volunteer. So we spend most of our time, frankly, trying to raise money year-round. If anybody were to sue us, the joke would be on them, because they wouldn't get anything, but we haven't sought that advice, frankly, because, we've been defending our rights as an organization based on what we're told we can do for years. And so, no, that hasn't been an issue.
I think probably what happens is it's a board that may not understand the impact of the proposed development on their community, and they just want, the attorneys always say no, right? So I ask the attorney to get a no, and then these pesky people go away. But, Miles, you've actually had some success getting homeowners associations supporting and.
Yeah, most of the attorneys that represent our HOAs in the Bee Ridge neighborhood have counseled them not to get directly involved in these land use disputes. In part, it's because, like Misty Creek, where we live, we have preserves, land that has a conservation easement on it, and the county, a couple of times a year, comes in and inspects them to make sure that we're not developing them, we're not destroying them. I don't know what they're looking for, but anytime we're under county supervision. Other HOAs want to remodel the clubhouse or make improvements on their property, which require building permits. And so the attorneys seem to be counseling the HOAs, focus on the four corners, the walls around your community, and don't get involved in stuff outside. And maybe that's good legal advice, I don't know. But as far as I'm concerned, if all hell breaks loose outside of your four walls, that's gonna have an impact on the quality of life within your gated community. If the traffic is so bad that you can't get onto the main road, if the first responders can't get through the traffic to answer calls in your community, and on and on, you have a dog in the fight as an HOA. So some of our HOAs are much more interested than others. Mine sort of indulges me in terms of meeting a committee of one, and so I'm sort of a committee of the HOA, kind of segmented off to the side, that just looks at what's happening outside the four walls, and talks at each HOA meeting about what's happening with Senate Bill 180, what's happening with the county commission, what's happening with stormwater management, what's happening with the celery field. So I bring in that dimension of what's happening so that our residents are informed and understand. And other members of our SEERD board do the same in their communities. Slightly different, each HOA plays it a little differently. But they don't seem to want to get too directly involved or directly involved at all. And I think it would help. I think if the HOAs would become part of these community-wide organizations, they're statutory bodies. They have a standing without a doubt, right? They raise a lot more money than we're going to raise. They have pretty big budgets. I take their point that they have their hands full just dealing with issues inside the four walls. And some of those issues can be just miserable, as you all know. Makes what's going on outside seem interesting and fun. But they tend to just focus on what's happening inside, and they don't want to get too involved outside. Now, maybe if it comes to a point where us getting out onto Lorraine Road becomes impossible because the traffic is going too fast and there's just too many cars, then they're gonna start to get involved. But I tell them, the day's gonna come when the dysfunction happening outside our community is gonna creep in, and we better be prepared. And so we're working on that.
Good, because I think you can avoid asking for money, but still you educate the mass for support, and it does carry weight with the county commission that there are letters from HOAs in the area that oppose. That doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't commit them to anything other than saying they oppose this proposed development. Would you like to talk something?
Sure. Regarding Forest Lake's involvement with the Phillippi Creek Coalition, our fourth wall was breached by water, so we felt obligated on behalf of our neighbors to step up to it. The other thing that involved in the process notion of increasing our stormwater taxes. And so we educated our residents about that, and many of them voiced their opinion against it, as it turns out. There was adequate funding available to deal with things. The other thing I want to say is, in our neighborhood, we're in a unique situation. There's a privately owned golf course, golf course is what we call it, surrounded by our development. And from time to time, we have had to step in, and our attorneys have never cautioned us not to, as recently as 2 years ago, as a matter of fact. And we've been successful recently, 3 times, in stepping out for our rights. So,
That's good to hear.
yeah, we are, as Connie said, a different kind of association. We're nonprofit and volunteer.
I wanted to mention one other thing, just from like a silencing standpoint, and we talked about this earlier, but the state preempting local government is a humongous problem, and SB180 is a huge problem. That's one thing that Florida Audubon is very focused on, is getting that overturned, and actually there was a lot of talk at the Audubon Assembly, we just met maybe a week and a half ago, that they felt strongly that in the next 6 months it would get either amended or overturned for anybody who's done. I think most people know what SB180 is, but basically, if you've had a hurricane in the last 3 years or any emergency in the area, you can't amend your comprehensive plan. At the same time, though, they were giving money to communities for resilience and all these resiliency money to change things within their community to make them more resilient, and then they went and took their main tool away. So I do think there's probably some change coming, but there's a lot more stuff like that that's been being pushed down. Things they can't consider in developments, all this stuff that the state has just taken away from local government and taken away their ability to make a lot of these things better. So I do think by approaching your local government as we're trying to help you, because I do think in a lot of cases, this is not a political issue across all spectrums. Nobody wants this, the development that's going on, and the out of control, like rampant lack of maintenance, the infrastructure falling apart. They can't keep up with all this stuff, and they've had all the tools taken away from them. So anything we can put back in their hands is very important for them.
It would be nice if SB180 gets changed. In the meantime, there's already another bill, a new bill just recently filed. It would change the definition of what compatible is. And if surrounding development is a certain percentage of it
That was the one that.
has the same density, then it's deemed to be compatible, regardless of what other impacts there might be. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Tallahassee that causes a lot of problems for local residents and our elected officials. If they want to do the right thing, they can't always do it. So any questions from the audience? This is your time to ask the panelists any more background on what they did or any ideas.
All right, I want to find out how we can get the Audubon involved. We have in the area that's going to be affected. We have a lot of stormwater problems and floodplains, but we also have a lot of endangered species like the wood stores, eagles, barn eagles also, I believe, or barn owls, I should say, barn owls, and sand-hill cranes. How can we get you involved?
If you send me an email, it's sarasotaAudubonpresident@gmail.com. I can't act on my own. I always advise people, and I'm happy to advise people, but anything that we do as far as getting involved has to be approved by my board. But we typically are fine sending letters on your behalf, or making people aware of it. Sometimes we can do an online statement of our support. It just gets more complicated because we have a board and we have a lot of members, and there's a million issues across the county. We're very visible in the community, so everyone reaches out to us for every issue, and it's a completely volunteer-run organization. organization. I'm a volunteer, everyone is a volunteer, so I have a job, so does everyone else. So our bandwidth is more than a lot of organizations, but also per person quite small. And so send me an email, I'm happy to bring it to the board. I bring all the issues that are sent to me to the board for us to discuss. But yeah, we're always available to advise as much as possible. I don't know how physically involved we can get with every single one.
Okay, because there's also scrub days, there's a preserve about half a mile.
Yeah, and we care about that, right? Like, we want to help with all those things. I'm just saying, I can't, one, speak for the whole organization, and two, the bandwidth is limited with the things that we can affect. Yeah.
Thank you. Terry, want to say?
Anybody else got a question?
As a retired Sarasota County teacher, I'm just curious, is the Classical Academy going to be building a school?
Yeah, they're using temporary facilities. They had those modular classrooms that probably are unlawful, but they're there. And then they retrofitted the larger structures that used to belong to Grace Church with partitions. And so they have, we don't know, maybe 700-800 students there, and they're working out of very, very temporary makeshift facilities. They have a grand plan in mind. They shared that with the county, and because we don't have much transparency anymore, we don't know what's happening. They did submit a site plan for a complete build-out back in January of this year. So at the beginning of this year, they submitted a site plan. We don't know the status of the site plan, but it was sent to the building department. And they've yet, to my knowledge, submitted the specs for the structures they want to build. Their original application involved building a gymnasium, classroom structures, auditorium, science lab, everything that a proper school would have. And I believe that they've gone out on the municipal bond market in order to find finance. So my assumption is those things are underway, and that this temporary facility at some point will give way to, brick and mortar buildings, science labs, a gymnasium, and other structures. And they're I guess they're eligible to use municipal bonds as they're a 501c3. So I guess they have access to the municipal bond market just like the public sector does. That's my understanding.
There's a football field there now?
Yeah, there's a temporary football field there now, and their plans, if they come to fruition, involve the building of the stadium.
Yeah, because I know I read about here in Joe being very concerned about the band playing there.
Yeah, there's music and stuff. I mean, they have a school, their high school, which is what uses a lot of these facilities, is fairly small compared to the rest of the school. But they have ambitions to create a proper school on that site. They just don't have, either they don't have the money to start that yet, and they don't, to my knowledge, have the permits necessary from the county. But now that the state has preempted all of that, there's a real question in the mind of most architects in Sarasota as to who they get the permitting from. The state of Florida is not capable of issuing those types of permits. The county, after they close the case on this school, is basically washing its hands. So I have no idea who's going to be the adult in the room, who's going to make sure that the health, safety, and welfare of the students, and the teachers, and the rest of the county is protected by proper design, proper construction, proper engineering of the site. They do have professional engineers working on those plans, and I think they spend a lot of money on the design process. But who's going to approve it, and who's going to inspect it during the build-out process? I think we're all questions right now that no one has answers to.
I think the private school currently of the Classical Academy, I believe the director was an architect. Did you know that?
No.
You want to look into that, it's interesting.
Okay, yeah, I will. Well, we have interaction with their board of directors. Representative Stubbe's wife is on the board, so she's one of the board members of that school. So some of our negotiations are involving the board. So it's an interesting organization that I don't understand the pedagogy or what differentiates them from other schools. I do know that there's been a lot of disgruntled parents who have come to us with complaints, and not that we can do anything about it, but I think a lot of people send their kids there because they're looking for choice, and there's been a fair number of people who've been disappointed. Fortunately for the school, they have a big waiting list, and they're able to draw on the waiting list to keep the school.
Yeah, and they're teaching Latin, there's a Latin base there as well, too. So it's a unique school, it's different than the typical public school in Sarasota County.
Yeah. But, it provides choice for people who can afford it. Some of the disgruntled parents who talk to us complain about the temporary nature of the facilities. They don't like that. They obviously complain about the traffic. And I guess for all these charter and private schools around the county, or around the state, where you have vouchers, state vouchers for tuition, that doesn't cover the full cost of having a kid in the school. And so parents are still shelling that money from their own pockets, I'm reliably told. And that seems to irritate a lot of people, because a lot of these people are not in a position to shell out additional money.
Yeah, I just as a parent, and I'm heavily involved in a lot of the school board stuff, the whole school choice thing and the schools of hope thing that's happening, where they're overtaking facilities, none of these schools that come in that are charter or private schools are bound to any form of state testing. So like, if they take their money to St. Martha's, they take their money to Classical Academy, they're taking money out of the public school system where the kids are being tested 3 times a year in fast testing to make sure they're maintaining their standards. And these private schools have 0 testing standards. So it is commonly known, as I know many teachers, the kids that are leaving Classical Academy specifically are a good 2 years behind kids in public schools. And in some cases cannot reacclimate. That's why parents are pissed off when they leave. They have no science labs, they aren't being taught any science curriculum in some cases. And so when they come back into a normal classroom, we've taken these public funds, put them into a school where they've been held to no standards. And it should be problematic across the board, because that's our money that's going to schools that are not being held across the board. Like, we don't know what any of the standards are at any of these private schools unless the kids come back out and try and reintegrate into a classroom. And the fact that we're saying, okay, you're under capacity in a school, we're just gonna come in and we get this school now, and the taxpayers are gonna have to pay for all of our transportation, all of the janitors, all of the support staff, basically, to run this school. Charter school has no financial obligation whatsoever. And they can come in to any school and do this, if it's under capacity.
Park was one of the, I know Park.
Oak Park is a special
a
needs
school
school.
for disabled kids.
Yeah, it's wild. This is when we're saying the state's preempting stuff, it's stuff like this. They're taking decisions completely out of the local government.
Rob, you got a question?
Yeah, I guess what it comes down to is I think that we've all learned that when you try to take on a problem individually, as a homeowners association or an organization, that you don't have a lot of success. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can keep the momentum going to have all the organizations involved in helping all the problems from that perspective. Because what I fear a little bit is that when Phillippi Creek gets solved, do you drop out? If the celery fields gets kept, do we drop out? You know, that kind of scenario, because as Miles pointed out, they started out alone, doing what they needed to do and thinking that they had all the evidence they needed to win. And I guess what I'm getting at is the idea that we have come so far as realizing that the only way we win is if we work as a huge team to show the county commission and whoever else we're dealing with the idea that it's not just a small group of people from a particular community who are going to be dealing with it. So again, if you have any suggestions on how we can keep this moving forward so that we don't just, okay, my problem solved, bye, that kind of thing.
Debbie was really in the fire. We have a few more Debbies, like everybody's on. No, I don't have.
Well, Rob, that's a great point. I've actually founded 2 nonprofit organizations, one with the help of the Department of Justice. And the big key to any organization is to sustain the life. Honestly, it ends up being champions. You have to continue to motivate champions, because frankly, I'm old. I'm not gonna be doing this for a long, long time. But this group has already talked about moving on, because when we speak publicly, we typically talk about waterway maintenance. There are other organizations that are already in play that, you know, if there was a way for us to coordinate with them, Kona is a great example. They're getting ready to relaunch again. You know, so I think, while there's no one answer for everyone, the idea of infusing new life is essential, because you get worn out. And, you know, I don't think anybody here intends to walk away. We've been fueled by the fact that even though we've had a couple of successes, the fact is nobody's dredging just yet. So there's that. Yeah, Navi, did you want to?
When you look at the historical record of Phillippi Creek, every time we flood, there's a group of people like us. This is going back to 1926 when the creek was first developed. And we get forgotten about. And I think part of our group is trying to figure out how to get policy changes made. Because to be honest, you work for the county, there was no waterways level of service probably since the 60s. The 62 storm was the last major where they were, actually dredging all of the creek. Because in 2000 they only dredged up to the Tunnel Bridge. My part of the creek has never been dredged since the 60s. So, I think it's trying to get policy implemented that'll help getting other groups involved. And I would love to continue to help other waterways. I know we're not alone. We're just the largest right now.
And I just want to comment that it is proof that Nadia knows history of, because she just started citing it. She probably spent here an hour talking about the history of the creek. So that just shows her credibility. I was at a meeting a couple months ago, unrelated to the Phillippi Creek or anything like that. Joe Nunder was there, and someone was asking a question, complaining about whatever the issue was. I didn't really pay attention to the question, but he said, you have to go and speak up. You have to go to the meetings, to the Board of County Commissioners, and speak, and bring other people there. And what we've done a lot of times is, we'll talk to our friends or neighbors or whatever, and say, show up and just speak for 1 minute. You don't need to speak for 3 minutes. Just speak. So if we get 100 people speaking for 1 minute, it's better than a couple of us speaking for 3 minutes. So it's just another effort. But you need to get 3 of the 5 commissioners on your side, and I think we've got that for the most part. And usually, when one starts talking, and he's using common sense, and he's using facts, they mimic our words now. We will say things, and they will actually mimic what we've said. And by doing that, then you have the other 2 or 3 will just join on, and they can't deny things that are speaking the truth about things. And you can say, look at the creek, you can walk across it on some aspects of it. They can't deny it, so they have to vote for it.
Susan, how many advisory commissions does this county have? I think there's 12 of them.
There's a lot more than that.
There's a whole bunch. Typically, this county, as we all know, has grown very fast, and we still run it like a mom and pop operation. We really do. My view, because I've worked in government for a while, is that we probably need more commissioners to be able to be a part of more of those advisory commissions. And it's in those advisory commissions, one which you now chair, on stormwater, that's where the technical discussion is, the knowledge is developed, the familiarity with the problems and opportunities rest. And so I think the best way for us as citizens in our groups to stay relevant and to stay involved and to learn and grow is to go to those advisory commission meetings, probably even more important than going to county commission meetings. It's those advisory commission meetings chaired by people like Susan and with other people who care about or know something about the subject, right? That's where the longevity is going to be. That's where the resources are. That's where the knowledge can accumulate. And so my suggestion for this county is we need to add a few more commissioners. I think we're just too big. We're 500,000 people now, and we act like we're 50,000. And we need to make better use of those advisory commissions. And each one of those advisory commissions should have a county commissioner sitting on it to take what that advisory commission does and understand their point of view and bring it to the full county commission. That's typically how these things work. And so we can maintain these organizations, that's fun. But I think if we want to be part of the formal structure and we want our voices heard and we want to get some of the resources and some of the attention that these issues need, I think we need to spend more time at these advisory commission meetings. What do you think?
Both.
Yeah,
All of the
but
above.
I'll give you just a little history on the advisory boards in Sarasota County. So when I was an outside consultant to the county and then in the county attorney's office, advisory boards were really important. We would not take a revised impact fee to the board unless we had unanimous approval from the Public Facilities Financing Advisory Board, PFAB. Because PFAB gave them political cover. There were people, Taxpayers Association and developers, realtors, wide representation on that advisory board. And for years, the consolidation of the city fire department with the county fire department. Same thing, we had a blue ribbon task force that met for like a year. And finally got it happen because that task force worked through the hard issues and brought it to the board. Somewhere after I left the county, probably about the time Jim Lay came on board as county administrator, advisory boards were turned into non-entities and barely functioning. So, I need to say I think SUAC is getting ready to make themselves more useful, but that's a big change. And it's only happening because Ben Quartermain's in place now, as well as some new members like Steve Swaz now on, and Rob's on there. So we have a nucleus of people with some knowledge and experience that can provide that to the board. Not that the people previously hadn't had that, but they weren't given the opportunity to add meaning to their time on the committee. I'm hopeful that people will go and get involved in some of these advisory boards. There's the water and sewer advisory board. There's probably a navigation and dredging advisory board. There's boards for everything. And they, it doesn't have to be like planning commission. It's a big deal. But each of these advisory boards can provide a lot of good information to the board if they want to do it. So we'll see. I think SUAC's getting ready to gear up and actually provide some recommendations to the board. We'll see how it goes.
Do you have some staff members or staff members?
There's one person that sort of manages the emails and helps, like, I work with him to prepare the agenda. He was the just prior stormwater manager, Paul Simonek, who's been great. He's been really good with SUAC, providing lots of information. Prior to that, SUAC was really kind of choked off. So I'm hoping the board seems to want involvement by the advisory boards now. This is a very different board than we've had in decades. And I don't know that any other board we've had for 20 years would have done what this board did in reaction to the stormwater issues and having the repeated public workshops. And they're open to taking information from the public. And it's just real different from what we've had for a really long time. So I think there's an opportunity here to get involved in some things and have a meaningful role. So if there's something you're interested in, go on the county's website, advisory boards, and see if there's one that interests you. And there's always vacancies coming up, so even if it's full right now, put your application in, and then when they have a vacancy, you'll be in line. Sorry, there's a fly bothering me right now. It said, shut up, Susan. Stop talking.
The reason why I say both, going to both is, one, I love going to SUAC meetings, because I've gone to all of them since February.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from them. I also go to WCIND meetings, because again, I learned a lot about stormwater and all that kind of stuff. But the reason I say both is because at the last county, Board of County Commissioners meeting, they had a report given by a PhD and a couple of interns that were pretty smart kids. They were talking.
It was the annual citizen survey.
And they have top marks,
Yeah.
really high marks. So, citizens don't have time to do all this. Of our little coalition, I think there's 6 of us that are retired, or at least 5 of us are retired. So it's a full-time job for us,
Yeah.
The hours that she spent putting into this presentation. But the reason I say both is because, we have to show up. We have to speak up, because we don't want them the commissioners to be complacent and think, oh, everything's fine, because it's not. We're positive, we're professional with them, but they were getting very high marks for Sarasota County.
And specifically, high marks for infrastructure, which was kind of shocking. But at the same time, when the citizens that were surveyed were allowed to say in their own words what are some of the top problems, for many years it's been development and population growth, but also traffic. So traffic has moved up. So I'm not quite sure how you get those 2 answers. That traffic's a big problem, but they're doing a really good job on infrastructure. I don't know how they got that, but apparently they did.
And just one last comment, with our little coalition, we meet not only, we meet separately also, at least once a week probably, on a Zoom meeting, which Nadia helps us set up for us. But we disagree on things, but it doesn't get to a point that we accept a person's argument, and we accept it, and so on, but we disagree, but we don't hold it back from our mission, which is really to get the whole waterway, the whole watershed cleaned up. So.
And one of the things that reminds me of one of the things that Connie said about y'all's group, and I think this is really important, you don't hoard information. A lot of people do because they think they work so hard to get that information and it could only be important to them. And what I find over and over and over again is what somebody found out over here overlaps with something I'm working on over here. And the connections between the information are critical. And so I thought that was a really good, I don't know if you formally said that's what you were going to do on purpose, but in any group and any group working with another group, there's a certain amount of trust. And granted, it's something that you've got to keep a secret. Okay, that you need to be careful who you tell, because this may not stay a secret. But in terms of documents and issues and information you find out, share it, because it's going to help somebody else. Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, we said it, so I agree.
So y'all did adopt that as a specific
I would
thing?
say it was, a strategic discussion one day. Part of evolving and figuring things out was being modeled. I mean, when Laura brings, information to the group, we're blown away. Same with Nadia or Seth or Dave or any of the others. And we do echo that when it happens. It's like, thank you so much. We all need to coordinate our communications with the commissioners. So I'm not gonna say that it was really a specific conversation one day where we were all telling each other, more of an evolved understanding and modeling from, different folks that had things to share. If I could just add one thing to Rob's great question, and, y'all have made some great comments, and I too I've run a state government division, and I've served on 2 large school boards in 2 states, so I was elected in that. And I will tell you, when it comes to commissions or committees, not to disparage anything, I've served on more than I can count, but the key is always what comes down from the top. And if the top is such that they're not listening to these committees and they're just, appointments of gratitude that no one takes seriously, people pick up on that pretty darn quick, and they're not gonna waste their time going to those meetings.
And they can't even fill all the slots
Yeah,
on the
you
committees.
can't, because the word is out. So ultimately, one suggestion of many is, who do we leverage influence over? And that is a conversation I know our board had in PCC. The people who work for us are not the county manager or not the county attorney. They're the commissioners. They work for us. That's the ones. We don't, all the staff, as great as they are, they don't report to us. They report to someone else. So I would still go back to, what Miles said is great, and it does, it does matter. But in addition to that, the fact is we cannot stop pressuring the people we've put in office. We just can't stop it. And we may want to, we may be tired of it. Lord knows, I'm in my 70s, I've been doing it for a while. But, the fact is, that's what we have to keep up. We have to keep the pressure. So if you can find a new, pull people into the group that pick up the energy when yours is starting to wane, then that's one of the few things. And Nadia said policy. If you can get policy drafted, by all means do it. So
Take it right to the county commissioners.
Yeah,
If you can come up
always.
with a policy that's what I was gonna say would keep a lot of this living on. We had amazing learnings. There's a lot of things that came out of the DR work hearing that made us think about things differently. There's definitely things that have come out of you guys' work that need to be put into policy so that they sustain, right? Like, you can make a one-time change, but you gotta keep that change. Celery Fields is an amazing example of a stormwater facility, but it's also a park, and it's a nature preserve. It's an amazing, multifaceted facility. Why don't we see more of those in the county? If we're building a stormwater situation, let's make it a park and a wildlife preserve at the same time. Write those things into policy so that they just automatically happen along the way. So we're not just losing the learnings and having to do these one-offs all the time. It really is a policy thing that needs to happen go forward. I know at Audubon, we've already talked about, going forward, here are a few things that we want to work on to make change on some dark skies legislation, talking about stormwater facilities and what they should look like in other places, because it's a great place to open up more wildlife corridors.
Yeah.
Waterways is a great one, like that Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, Sarasota Bay Watch, they're all working on pieces of what you guys are working on, but further downstream or further upstream in the ponds,
It's all connected.
It's all connected. It's about getting behind great policies and finding great partners in other organizations, I think.
Agreed.
And the policy is documented in the comp plan, is it not?
It really kind of depends on what policy it is, but the foundational goals are in the comp plan. So it would establish, we actually have a lot of really, really good policies in our comp plan. And now that it's on Muni Code, so you can find our comp plan now if you go to Muni Code I think it's .com. And they've got libraries of different communities, regulations and comp plans. And so now you can go in the comp plan for Sarasota County and you can search by terms. So used to do that, I had to download all the chapters individually from the county's website, convert them to a searchable PDF. It was just a terrible thing. But now it's super easy. And I found stuff in the comp plan, and I've read that comp plan a jillion times. And I found new stuff when I was looking for it for salary fields. I was up, you know, there's some great stuff in there. So you can, you're done? So anyway, so we've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous of searching in the comp plan, but thank you so much. I learned a lot from you guys tonight, and I hope everybody here did, and I hope you'll all come back to an understanding.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.